We're about to. Live, hell, welcome to another Evolution Hour, this time hosted by Peter in the wilds of early morning Holland. And we've got TD Lane and Tornado Pelt as guests here as well.
Hello.
Unfortunately, Jackson is busy working, so he was not able to join us on that. Peter's substituting for scientist Maille, who is on a well-deserved vacation and happily enjoying herself in the wonderful forests and food and enjoying herself in relaxation because she's got to look forward to the college grind starting as a teacher in soon enough. So we don't begrudge her that in the slightest. Anyway, as at least we have the camera running. Yeah, we've got our continuing. We got our continuing discussion of Replacing Darwin, which is Richard Jensen's tome that does not have an index. It doesn't have a reference bibliography, and so I've been assembling that in the same way that I did with the Rupy and Sanford books on human evolution. Well, it's a slog. And which got a little slower yesterday because my smartphone died. So I spent a lot of yesterday slogging along trying to get a replacement and getting back up to speed on that. But we will have a nice big part 2, which will relate to Neanderthals in chainmail. Anyway, Jensen was playing some authority quoting for material on John Gurdon and his Nobel Prize winning work on how cells draw on DNA and development. It's actually relating to stem cell stuff, which I thought kind of interesting that Jensen doesn't use those terms much. This is actually kind of an incendiary area for creationists who tend to get bristly about stem cell research. And so I'm wondering why he was going to all the trouble of bringing it up. There were a couple papers that I put in that he linked to, and fortunately they were available open access, that from 2006 and also 2013. He won Nobel Prize for it all. Perfectly fine work which doesn't overtly have any connection to evolution, so I think that's why he felt a little safe to bring it up, because there was no discussion of the dreaded E word anywhere in that stuff. So
evolution.
Yeah. But stem cell research is sufficiently incendiary as an issue among anti-abortion advocates that connects up with the creationist worldview. I'm wondering whether or not it was a good idea for him to be going into this, which is the whole issue about how cells start differentiating in multicellular organisms. And the idea that when it's really early, it's got kind of like a universal cell, and then it gradually takes on specializations as you go downstream. And how all that works, well, that's the idea about stem cell research. Brian Stevens says, never mind, we know from them in the lab it's cheaper and easier than harvesting. The goal, as even Gurdon was calling attention to, is the idea that you could theoretically have all sorts of positive benefits, and also understanding more about how cancerous systems run. One thing that cancer cells kind of are like are stem cells run amok, that they just never quite get into the game with all their little fellow cells and start going their own little way. And so there's a whole bunch of ups and downs, implications of things. And I don't know that Jensen's really going to bother about that much in the rest of the story, because way down the road, he's going to be trying to prove that everything is only 6,000 years old or maybe less. The colossal amounts of speciation taking place post-flood and all of that. That's his main argument. Lisa for Truth says, how can they deny something that clearly takes place? Oh, you don't think like a creationist. It's perfectly capable of them to just not think about things they don't want to think
about. To go back to SFT and Dan's discussion a few weeks ago, SFT outright denied that population genetics works the way it does. So
yeah,
this
is funny. Well, there's been a busy week going on with an awful lot of work. Something that we're going to discuss next month will be raw mat. For those of you familiar with raw mat, He's an associate of Standing for Truth. Together, they are like a not quite half-wit level in terms of expertise. But anyway, Rawmat posted a paper on antediluvian age of human beings and mutation rates that supposedly confirms the 6,000-year time frame and allows for people living to be 800 years old and having babies at 500 and all of that stuff. And unfortunately, he offered sources. And we'll be looking into all of that. But the short form is, no, they don't quite say what he claims they do. And I'm even wondering where he thought to bring up some of these sources. It's inexplicably obtuse of him, because there's sources that haven't really been dealt with by other people before. So and Rawmat also was giving the impression that this thing was going to be in PLOS biology. And he put a logo up on the front, and some people started wondering about that. Is this really submitted to PLOS biology?
Yeah.
And this hit the fan, and he removed that part. And now he's even removing access to the paper.
As one of the people that was in that stream where Speed, me, and Dapper went over that, it was just like, yeah, I'm sorry, but if it's submitted for peer review, you shouldn't be posting it online. And now he's saying that it's up for peer review. It's going to take a few months.
That Rawmat's little tome wouldn't pass peer review in a high school newspaper.
No,
it was a terrible piece of writing.
Yeah, but that paper, which Speed has still with that fraudulent banner there, Speed went and contacted PLOS Biology about it. So we'll see if they actually got that or not. Because if they did,
Faithful, what's the rest of his name? Faithful something and true, something like that.
Plausible, Faithful
in Australia.
Him.
Yeah, which is really not a good description of him. Anyway, he was fuming up and down up the yin yang that he was going to sue anybody that dared to spread lies about Rawmat's paper, and accusing and threatening me in case I spread lie. Well, excuse me, there's no lies offered. I'm just looking up the sources, and if it doesn't say what you claim it does, that's your problem, not mine. So we'll be getting into that next month. But this month was kind of one that's really surprised the hell out of me, because I'm not unfamiliar with the creationist venue. So I know the arguments have been made on so many subjects, and it's really unusual to find an example that I wasn't at least generally aware of. And so this one, apparently, it popped up because Kent Hovind brought it up just recently. And it's that supposedly a Neanderthal was found in chainmail from the Middle Ages, which completely throws off our understanding of chronology and blah, blah, blah. You can fill in the gaps on it. Well, I hadn't heard that before.
Evolution speak. Where?
Yeah. And it turns out that it's got a bit of a provenance that traces back to a fellow, Doug Sharp, in 2003. And I put the link in the video description.
You know, RJ, I feel like I recognize that name.
He's a very minor league nutball in the creationist community. Very, very minor. In fact, the reason why I hadn't heard of this incident before, it's because it's circulating in the lower echelon bunch. But Jim Foley had heard about it at the time at Talk Origins, and he put a criticism of it, which then Doug Sharp responded to in the posting that I put up. And I've got the Talk Origins posting of it as well. And it turns out that back around 1908, a Czechoslovakian researcher had found this old burial site and of a thing with armor and all the rest. And the skull that was left over, he thought was Neanderthalish. And apparently he kind of thought that there were these remnant Neanderthals that had survived. And back in 1908, they had a different set of chronology. They didn't have any notion about how long ago Neanderthals had died out. This was 1908. And the paper itself was kind of invisible for years. It was alluded to peripherally in Nature magazine, but that was about as far as it went. And then down the road in 2015, Ian Juby heard about the fact that somebody had finally dredged up the original paper. And so he obligingly, nice guy, put up excerpts from it and pictures of it, which is, I've also put the website up, the link to that, and also some translation of what the texts involved. Well, that is probably not the best way to go about doing stuff, putting up too much information, because then you can start analyzing it. Because right in that paper that you can go linking to yourself, they have the skull, which is not the clearest of pictures, but that's the famous skull from the 1908 paper. And you'll notice it lacks a lower jaw, which means you can't tell if it has a chin or not. But right off the bat, you can see it doesn't have really terrible brow ridges. It doesn't have a terribly receding forehead by the standards of Neanderthal. And you'll notice that the bulge in the back isn't up on top the way Neanderthal. It looks more like a human being. Exactly.
That looks like a human skull with a slightly pronounced brow ridge.
You can understand the blur back in 1908. Yeah. But for somebody to come along and try to make a big deal out of it 100 years later, yeah, no. So naturally, Kent Hovind is resting on a parasitical daisy chain where there is no there. Because, of course, we've moved way beyond fragmentary skulls and stuff. We've got a remarkably good set of Neanderthal fossils now, including juveniles, which are probably the most important diagnostic of all in relation to that, because to see how the babies are growing up, how tooth eruption patterns are occurring, how bone sutures are occurring. And now that we have the DNA from the later groups, the more inbred tail end of Neanderthals about 25,000 years ago, the upshot is, no, Neanderthals aren't humans. They're pleasants still, but not in our species. Now, the creationist, meanwhile, and this is going to be a topic that if Jackson was able to be with us, we would have been thrashing out in more detail. It's going to be in the volume 2 of Rocks, is the whole idea that creationists are trying to put Neanderthals as degenerate human beings, and that theoretically all of their DNA could have come from Adam and Eve or Noah and the kids somehow. That Neanderthals, in some of the apologetics that's occurring in the current Standing for Truth orbit creationism, Neanderthals are originating post-flood, which is 4,300 years ago and less. And that's, shall we say, gobsmackingly silly?
It's not just gobsmackingly silly, it's fucking wrong.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm seeing that. Yes, up on the top. Yeah, you're fancy schmancy. Yeah, that is one thing. I've seen others that the StreamYard system can do that relatively easy. The ones that I've seen it, they put it at the bottom, but you decided to be contrarian and put them up on the top, you little scamp. Okay, well. Cross fingers. I'm amazed. I will still inform everybody as an old fart that I'm amazed that any of this works at all. And so the fact that I can be talking with people all around the country and the planet, it's wow. Well, you don't want to let the secret out that you are in fact a robot now, do you, Peter?
Beep boop.
Yes. My argument is, if anyone was
I've got a question.
that I was a robot, yeah. Ask away.
Does that mean that if someone were to, does that mean that if a robot were to pretend to be a human, like doing everything a human could do, would that mean it was a robot in disguise?
Yeah. Well, now we'll put it through the Turing test, and then we'll find out whether it can memorize person, man, woman, camera, TV. That's an important diagnostic these days, apparently. Yeah, well, who knows? I think we've already got a robot vice president. Yeah, Kamala Harris. Mm, well, it George Takei said there ain't enough popcorn to cover this one.
I think he's right.
Yeah, it's going to be kind of interesting. So we veered slightly into politics, but it's impossible to do that now, because let me connect that up with a thing that I've alluded to in previous episodes. If you think that creationism doesn't impact stuff, remember that apparently the guy that's been screwing up the efforts to get the Republicans to find some sort of agreement with the House of Representative Democrats on aid packages, not so much because of Steve Mnuchin or that bunch, but Mark Meadows, the chief of staff, has been the one glitching up. Mark Meadows is a creationist who sold stuff to Ken Ham. He has that kind of a mindset. And so this affects actual people's lives because it's affecting actual politics. It's not an abstract issue.
For those of you who are not aware, Mark Meadows sold a large amount of land to AIG, which is fossiliferous. In fact, AIG's rather fantastic Allosaurus skeleton came from there.
Yeah. And he doesn't blurb a lot about it, but the fact that he's on schmoozy sailing terms with Ken Ham tells you a lot about it. That Tony Perkins network, if you look up Family Research Council, I'll type that into the live chat in here. Family Research Council, the FRC, and Tony Perkins. Google those and find out as much as you can about. Tony Perkins is a young Earth creationist. I think he graduated from Liberty University or Oral Roberts, one of those two. And he thinks that Ken Ham is a great Bible scholar and the Creation Museum is just fabulous science. And that network, Brian says, I hear RJ and sometimes TD, but Tornado is oddly silent. Yes, Tornado is circumspect. Make noise.
Playing Pokemon Super Mystery Dungeon.
We were worried about you, Tornado.
Well, no, actually, I was playing a Pokemon game.
I don't know. I think Tornado's going to hike up Mountain Dew.
He gets rowdy on the Mountain Dew.
What the hell is going on with my microphone?
Anyway, that as much as we would like to think that discussing creationism is an abstract exercise that doesn't affect important real stuff, sorry, it bumps into every layer. And one of the things that I hope people everywhere.
No, you are. Tornado, we can hear you.
Okay, good.
Yeah. One thing that I hope everybody does at their local level and in any social media they do is to probe politicians as to what stands they have as to their background philosophy. A lady just won the Republican nomination for, I think, a House seat in Georgia, and she has QAnon proclivities, which is the current wackaloon, head up their ass, weird conspiracy theory obsessions of the month going on in here. And fortunately, we knew about it because it had gotten covered. But how many people are running for school boards or city council or state representatives or controllers or insurance commissioners or judges all across the nation who may have a lot of weird beliefs that you don't know about because nobody ever asks them and they don't ever have to take a stand on it? And I would contend that source methods question.
Too damn many.
Well, we don't know. It's because they aren't asked. There are ways around it. if, for example, typically conservative groups, just like progressive groups, often put out voter pamphlets, guides for elections. So if somebody that is known has a conservative network attachment, that is at least a clue. In the same way that if somebody is endorsed by the progressives, that's telling you about their political persuasion. But I frankly find it frustrating that the vast majority of public servants in the United States, we have no idea how many of them think the Earth is only 6,000 years old,
Yeah,
unless
I
it
encountered one of those
blurts out.
today.
Yeah, I know there were some that were serving in some of the conservative districts in our state legislature in my state. And we have some, sometimes it veers into weird politics. There's a guy, oh God, Mike McShay, something like that. And he's being ousted from the state Republican Party, which is a highly conservative party, because he's so far out into wackaloon land that it's bothering even them. And he wants to secede Eastern Washington and merge with Idaho to form a separate white supremacist state. Yeah. So these methods questions are not abstract. Are we getting a dual echo from me?
Nope.
Okay, I was just hearing a slight thing, and maybe just on my end. At any rate, Zmorph says, hi, RJ, TD Lane, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the spinning Einstein coin. That's Peter. It's not Albert's, it's Euler's disk. Yeah. Not to be confused with, yeah.
I think it's about time for you to go over Patreon.
Oh, absolutely. Dear. Yes, we are. Yes, to thank everyone, my patrons. For one thing, this has been really wonderful, because part of the reason why I did not have a conniption fit panic at the prospect that I would need to replace my smartphone is because of all the help everybody has given me in Patreon to go along with the Social Security and the book royalties to be able to actually have enough surplus floating around to give a little bit of extra to be able to do a thing for an emergency. And so all of the patrons out there who have stuck it through, even though everything is nervous in all of the economy, I will thank everybody, our colleagues, Hendril and Eric Rowley and Benjamin Simpson, Speed of Sound, Cirrus and Zeshi, our researchers, Travis Adams, the ubiquitous Ian Chen, Convert Me, Eat Meal, James Fitzwater, History Miner, Ralph McFadden, and Pelagia, our assistant researchers, Duranko and Todas Real, and our friends of the project, Daniel, Steve Bauman, Marigale Beddoes, Insects Are Cool, Devin Miranda Reeves, Morton Nielsen, Paul the Skeptic, Puffalophagus, Bo Rasmussen, Alex Stone, and Paul Williams. And as usual, I will thank all the legacy patrons there, Jen and Jody and Mike and John, Keith, Andrew, Dyer, Yui, Mona, Brad, Daniel, Nanya, Staggles, Sun Sky Stone, Ugly German Truths, Everett Vincents, and Soar, who helped at one point or another during the course of it, because every little bit counts. And so I will never forget any of all of that. So we got a lot of stuff that's going to be... Yes, say something.
Recently, as in just yesterday, I encountered this guy named Tim Webb, who claims that babies back in Adam and Eve's time were genetically modified and so were no longer human. This guy sounds great.
By whom? Who was doing this genetic manipulation?
I don't think there's any evidence for that, and I think that person is insane.
No, but nevertheless, who was he claiming was doing this? Could it be Satan?
Oh, and when I basically started telling him how the flood couldn't have possibly happened, and I told him this is coming from a Christian. He then said, "But you're saying hath God said, and therefore you're a Satanist."
Oh, well, I'll tell you, my little Tortugan alert would be flashing pretty big time on him.
So then when I asked him,
alarm is sounding.
So I basically asked him repeatedly for sources.
Oh yeah, and so far it's been crickets. Yeah, in the land of Nod, were a lot of housing developments there. They were just opening up a Starbucks, I think, at the time of the flood.
Oh, yeah. No, I went to it just before the flood happened. Just let you know.
Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of a teaser about the fact that there's going to be lots on the prehistory of human beings and early civilizations in Volume 2, Rocks 2, because we've got a discussion of the flood from the mythological end, and then also how did people move around with their animals and their crops and stuff? How did they get to where they are? When did all of this happen? And this is like if you need a parlor game, your creationist big slosh bingo card, just all of the information blips that would need to be done to make a convincing argument for the flood, and how you're not going to get any of that from any flood advocate. At the moment they start bumping into things.
But Jeanson says, but Jeanson makes predictions, RJ.
Oh, yeah. I happen to be wrong, but nevertheless, yeah, he's got him in there. That I'm a historian, so I tend to think of it in history terms. So I'm aware of all of these other people around there. The amusing thing about the Bible is how limited it is. It's framing essentially the Middle East and relatively close neighbors. You have diddly squat about the Americas. That's what Joseph Smith and the Mormons filled in with the Latter-day Saints. And of course, they forget completely about the Chinese, all of the people living in Northern Asia, all of the people living in Africa, Oceania, all of that. It's a staggering amount of information. Oh, Vesta Frey, yes. By using flying kangaroos. Yes, now there's a model that they were waiting for the ballistic kangaroos, and then people would latch onto them because the kids that they didn't like so much in Noah's rabbit breeding family after the flood would then hitchhike on ballistic animals that were being thrown out by the volcanoes. Yes, I like that. Yes, that could make a good cartoon.
Honestly,
and Peter says, yes, according to Georgia Purdom, the correct pronunciation is woof. Georgia Purdom. The woof. Yes, well, woofs in sheep's clothing or ship's closing. How about that? Maybe they were all at Yosemite Park. There's many possibilities going on in here. But the Purdom really should know better, because she allegedly has a genetics degree and has actually published a long time ago in actual genetics journals. But boy, as Jackson and I documented in the book, where there'll be a cute little plug on that at the end of the story, Purdom is just disgracefully bad. She's superficially bad, even by comparison to other creationists. That her discussion of the Lenski work, for example, is remarkably superficial, whereas somebody who really should have less credentials than she does dives in more detail, gets it all wrong and misrepresents it, but at least tried with more of the material than Purdom did. So there's almost a measurement that when you start seeing the higher echelon anti-evolutionists, that they are much more careful about what they talk about and what they like to cite, and because they know the pitfalls of it a little better than the lower echelon ones who just dive headlong into the empty pool without realizing the problems that they're in. That's another point about my tip research, is to get kind of a taxonomy of how the ones operate a pecking order, so that like what we've been talking about with Ian Juby, he's way below the level of a Nathaniel Jensen or a Georgia Purdom. He's operating at the grassroots flunky level that Kent Hovind plays around with. Carl Baugh, who's
SFT is in the chat. Say hi.
Oh, hi, SFT. Kevin Anderson has studied the Lenski experiment in great depths. So we're sure you think, Standing. Yes, we will stipulate that you are convinced of that. Yeah. That presumably is his interaction with Dan. And I'm afraid that's probably rather an overstatement. But in the creationist world of never fact checking their source material and following up on it, I'll just give you a heads up if you just came in, Standing. You really ought to source check those papers that are being offered by RawMat, and you too have presented those as supposedly showing that 6,500, 6,000 year time frame for material. I've managed to find all but one of them, and they don't really say what RawMat claims they do. And so this will be an interesting subject matter for a section of Rocks 2, as well as an upcoming evolution hour. Live by the source, die by the source. And Zmorph, Zmorph has been subjecting himself to the terror of going back and watching Evolution Hour going back all the way to 2017. He's been making very nice comments on that, and so I give you the kudos for doing. Yep. Oh, what do we got in here? We got creation myths. Oh, hi, Dan. Yes, your name was being taken in vain by certain people. Standing for Truth says, I always listen to RJ's stream. I enjoy them. I just finished a good book on human evolution by Bernard Wood. Bernard Wood has a ton of technical papers on human evolution. He's a major player in the field. He's been active for many, many decades. Most of his material is probably accessible online. The books would be a secondary matter. It's the primary source technical work that he's been involved with. At any rate, oh, and Ian Chen, thank you. Ian Chen is one of my patrons and also somebody who has been helping tons of people, Dapper Dino and a lot. You are a wonderful person and are much appreciated. Dan the science man, as he is indeed. He is, after all, an actual teacher. I am but a lowly little BA in history. What am I to say compared to the great lights of the world? But I can effing read, and I can look up source material. I can check out what claims are made and what sources say or not. And that's my gig. Source methods is extremely valuable because it cuts across the boundary layers that normally separate philosophy and science. Because a philosophy is highly presuppositional. Here we're getting into some serious background bits here. Science, of course, deals with whatever is true, whether you like it or not. As I think Neil deGrasse Tyson has put it that way. And whereas philosophy are the things that you would prefer to be true or not, and you build your life based on them, you change your behavior based on them. Those are your philosophical beliefs. But every one of the players on both those fields ultimately are making assertions. They are relating to source field. They're relying on authorities or not. They're citing material or not. Now that's a measurable phenomenon. We can find out what they're citing, what they're not, how they're quoting it. If they make an assertion that Schmidlap says that elephants are a form of cucumbers, and you look up Schmidlap and he doesn't mention elephants and he doesn't mention cucumbers, that is a scholarly mistake. And that's how you can, it's not a matter of opinion, it's an observation. So source methods allows you to make observations that are objective in nature, independent of whether elephants actually are cucumbers or not, which would be a higher level metaphysical debate and systematic debate and a whole bunch of other things that you'd be getting into. So the ability to use that source method scalpel to, at the very least, weed out people who, if they are making bad arguments, misrepresenting source material, exaggerating source material, they're off the field. They can't be taken seriously because they're not playing the source methods game fairly to begin with. before they even get to the stage of doing an argument. There's the old physicist line, I think it was Pauli or someone who was saying that a particular physics theory was so bad it wasn't even wrong, that it just didn't even get on the field.
Basically,
and
this isn't right. This isn't even wrong.
Yeah. And there's also a degree of snobbery in the ones that are the hard, air quotes, hard science groupies, physics and chemistry and that like, as opposed to paleontology and things that are involved in contingencies that happened in the past, that it's unrepeatable, supposedly. Well, we're getting into the stage where you actually can start repeating past biological events in paleogenomics. But we already have faced this thing in astronomy, because astronomy is the ultimate historical science. Literally, you are looking back into time when you look into space. And so when you look at the pole star Polaris, you're seeing it as it was 400 years ago. If you take out a telescope and look at Andromeda, you're seeing it as it was 2.5 million years ago. You literally don't know what it's doing now, and you don't know what it was doing 1 million years ago, unless you could get in a spaceship and fly 1 million years away from light years away from Earth to catch a look at it to see what's going on. So astronomy is literally time travel, and you always are looking at things in time slices. The moon is what, a couple seconds old. You're looking at the sun; it's 8 minutes old. All of that. Even technically speaking, when you're looking at a distant mountain, it's a fraction of a second older than you think it is.
It's Wolfgang Pauli.
Yeah. Pauli exclusion principle. That guy.
Das ist nicht nur nicht richtig.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. We were discussing apparently a T-Jump was having a debate with U. Ross over whether or not alien visitations were due to demonic practices of the person who was backsliding from true belief. Is that a fair summary? Yeah. And yeah.
You know, this
It
reminds me.
sounded like
This reminds me. I
a
was
testable
watching
hypothesis.
Ancient Aliens last night up until like
Oh, my
almost
condolences.
midnight. No, I forget how long, but me and Dapper watched like 3 episodes of Ancient Aliens, and we had a few others for the first one. It was bad.
Oh yeah. They're I haven't watched it in quite a few years. There's that unctuous little twit who's the Eric von Daniken guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know exactly who I'm talking about.
Well, Netflix has all of season 2, and they have Eric von Daniken on there.
Oh yeah, because this is the Eric von Daniken worldview. The little unctuous guy is the current spokesperson for von Daniken, although von Daniken still trots around and gives little speeches and stuff. I'm old enough to remember when Chariots of the Gods came out, and so it was just a new thing in 1968, 69. Yeah. It's a good story. It's gripping. I mean, the idea that space aliens are coming down and making beep beep noises at the Mayans, and they're incorporating all this stuff and taking King Pakal up in a spaceship, and then they're commemorating this in their monuments. I mean, it has a certain delightful feel to it. You can make a nice TV show out of it. It'd be wonderful. Yeah, and they did. Well, not only that, there's elements of that in Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull. Kind of plays off that element too. Yeah. And unfortunately, it has one minor snag. It's stupid. It has no connection whatsoever. And in part, it's because when von Daniken was writing all of this stuff back in the 60s, first of all, no one can ever accuse von Daniken of being a diligent scholar. He was superficial even by nutball standards. But the point is that an awful lot of what we now know about the Mayans wasn't available because they couldn't read Mayan glyphs easily. They knew the number part, but virtually all of it was persona non grata. They couldn't figure out what the thing was. In the 70s and 80s and 90s, it dawned on them to do a kind of a silly thing they should have done before, which is, aren't there living Maya? They still speak the Maya language. Could it be that the Mayan glyphs are the glyphs for the things that the Mayans speak? And so shouldn't you pay attention to their words and so gradually they started actually working out, and now they can read all of the Mayan glyphs. So now we know all of the stuff that's on the stelae in great detail, and sorry, it ain't ancient astronauts.
Yeah, it's one of those things where while the actual Aztecs are gone, the Nuhua, which were closely related groups in Mesoamerica, are still around. We still have the Maya around. We still have Quechua and Aymara Indians around.
Language,
We still have these languages around. We can look at them.
Oh yeah, and so it's been a revolution. One of the things that was the big revolution, quite independently of blowing ancient astronauts out of the water, but if you go farther back into the 1930s, people often project their own needs onto a culture if they don't know much about it. So in the case of the Maya, this was done in a time when Europe was breaking down into Hitler versus Stalin, and Britain was their system was falling apart, and there was depression all over the planet. There was a lot of nervousness going on, and so an awful lot of the archaeologists who were poking around in the Maya would see these big friezes and paintings of their stuff, and they would be seeing like human sacrifices and dripping blood, and they didn't want to see that. They wanted the Maya to be philosopher kings who were looking at the heavens in their things and figuring everything out, and they were peaceful and wonderful, and then maybe died off because of a plague came by or something like that, and it was a better world than our murky 1930s. No, they were a bloodthirsty people. They practiced human sacrifice. We know that all. They were doing it accurately. And the archaeologists in the 1930s just couldn't wrap their heads around that. By the time you get down, not only the Mesoamerican cultures, but down in Peru, there was a long tradition of human sacrifice, not quite on the relentless scale that the Aztecs were doing it, because they were reaching the case in the Aztecs that, hey, you got to keep the sun rising, you got to kill people. Now, you don't want to risk the sun not rising, now do you? So you better keep the blood flowing. But even down in when the Inca Empire, when they would consecrate a new temple, they could kill 10,000 people at a go on that, and that's not nice, in my judicial opinion on this.
There is one thing to be said.
So we have a much more.
There is something to be said for human sacrifice is not good. Like, if you really
and by the way, this enters into issues and cultural issues. The Aztecs are a fascinating people from my end of it. They're like the Romans, simultaneously amazing and repellent. That you could argue that the cleanest, most spectacular city on the planet in 1400 was Tenochtitlan in Mexico.
Yeah,
it was fabulous. It blew, just smackingly impressive. How wonderful, and boats flowing around, and there was people selling flowers and crops and things in the canals and all that. It was absolutely amazing, and pyramids stained with blood up the yin yang, and that also the Aztecs were like Nazis in that they were information suppressors. They were burning Maya books before the conquistadors ever arrived. They had a sense of their own superiority as a culture, that they were the chosen people, and everybody else had to obey them. And so when you think about some Aztec satrap visiting some Mayan subordinate city, it was probably with the same deferential terror that a Nazi Gauleiter got when they were visiting the Warsaw Ghetto. It's a creep out moment. So I have very ambivalent feelings about the Aztecs.
Yeah, keep in mind, like, other than like the very easternmost Mayans, like Zapotec and Mixtec and some northern Guimaras, more or less all of Mesoamerica, basically central southern Mexico and Guatemala, was more or less subjects of the Aztecs.
Oh yeah, and we're learning now all the time with ground penetrating radar and others how much information on the archaeology we didn't know, how extensive some of these settlements in that were that we didn't realize that were around these city states and that. So piece by piece, bit by bit, all of this is stuff joined together. There have been other cultures that have been just as ruthless. I mean, the Qing dynasty that set up the Chinese Empire. Boy, that megalomaniac. The guy that first started the great
Qing Shi Han.
Yeah,
he and, really went insane. he went
in his mountain
because he wasn't immortal. It's nasty.
Yeah, when you become a king, you kind of want to be immortal. That's sort of a common thread, and so there's this long tradition as cultures become where they have disposable wealth that kings want to take it with them. And so they want to figure that there's a selection pressure, I would contend, for religions that lead to beliefs in afterlives and ways of taking it with you. So if you can't take it with you, at least you can send it on ahead. Like if you make a little model of a house and a model of a servant and a model of a cow in the afterlife, if you do the rituals right, and by the way, make sure that the priests get paid, otherwise you don't get the rituals done right. So now you have a selection pressure for the priesthood maintaining things in power. Then you'll get your little cow in your house and that in the afterlife. See, there we go. Just make sure the priests. Oh yeah, absolutely. That it tells you a lot about the cultural framework of things. And the only reason we have King Tut is because it didn't get robbed. It was one of the rare ones that escaped the robbery. When you remember that King Tut was a minor pharaoh, a kind of pimple on the back ass of Ramesses II's descendants, that you and Akhenaten, that when you think about how much wealth must have been in the big league pharaohs' tombs. Holy shit. But
can you imagine how much gold was in the Great Pyramid? Oh boy.
Yeah, or at the very least, the funerary buildings and stuff around it. I had the delight of being able to see both of the King Tut exhibitions that went around. The one back in the 1970s and the one that was maybe, 5 or 10 years ago, something like that. And they, by the way, were different. They were different sets of stuff. So the big famous gold mask of King Tut was not sent out on this most recent one, but it was back in the 1970s. And one, oddly enough, my favorite.
Where was that again?
It went all around places. I saw them both in Seattle. They hit Seattle as one of the spots.
Pacific Science Center.
Yeah, Pacific Science Center.
I saw that.
Which used to be so cool. the Ford Pavilion, and a few others were over in that area back in the World's Fair. I'm an old fart, so I remember.
It's almost time to plug the patrons again.
Well, we did that in a half hour, but anyway, the thing that impressed me most about King Tut was something that was extremely small and trivial. It was a little, I think it was like a kind of anthropomorphized animal bit that had little legs stuffed on, and I can't remember whether it was a box on the top of it or whatever, but it was placed on a mirror, and you could see the underside of it in the case. And you could see the fact that there was just a little bit of paint trim around on the inside. And you could see where the painter the glob of paint had faded out, and they had gotten a fresh blob of paint to continue the line around it. And that's, to me, was the most impressive thing, because it reminded me that a human being made that a human being had constructed that thing, and that they had gotten a little tired and they were now picking up the line from the next spot over. That, to me, was more impressive than some of the big spectacle stuff that was so spectacular on the outside.
Yep.
Absolutely. Another thing, I had the chance to visit the Chaco Canyon site in the Four Corners there up in New Mexico, and I've been waiting years and years and years. And my niece and I, when we went down to visit my sister for a big celebration in the family, finally routed my way through it to get back up there, because it's out in the middle of nowhere. If you don't plan, it's really tough to get to. There's nowhere to stay next to it. You're 50 miles away from your motel and all that. It's desolate. But the thing is that to see it physically after all of these years was one of the most magnificent experiences that I'd ever had. And for me, walking along the back side of all of these Chaco Canyon structures was more informative than going into the main areas, because there happened to be one wall that was just in the back area, and it was so complete and intact that it looked like they just finished it yesterday. And it's so smooth and beautiful, the way that the mud bricks had been stacked together in just a tight line. And I just wanted, I was so saddened, because I wanted to know who made that wall. Was it a team of people? Were there men and women? Were they young or old? Did the maker, were they admired or were they oppressed? Were they happy or sad? What was their life? How long did they live? Who made that wall? Because they had no written language, so we don't know.
The Anasazi are
fascinating. That was the name that was given to them either by the Hopi or the Navajo. It was an insult term.
Yeah, which is one of the things.
Yeah. So we don't even know what they call themselves.
Ancient aliens, I forget what they fucking translate to, but they say it translates to X, even though I know that it's an insult because I actually read about it. Lisa asked, is that where the cliff dwellings are? No, that's in a different area. And there too, there are so many. I've never been able to get to the main cliff dwelling areas. That was another one that would have taken a long roundabout to get to. But I was able to see some of the cliff dwellings. If you need a spot that's relatively accessible to get to, Arizona, because there's quite a lot of the settlements that are in the area north by the Grand Canyon, and then farther south on the road down to... What?
Well, your stuff, RJ. It's almost 11.
Oh, yes. Well, I just want to finish my mushroom story. The bit about Arizona and the various Native American cultures in there. There's a whole slew of those. So in addition to seeing the wonderful material in Colorado and New Mexico and those other areas, don't forget the stuff in Arizona, that there's quite a lot of settlements in there. And this is all roughly the 1100, 1200 year period that they were screwed when there were climate changes, partly due to volcanism and other climate things that were happening all around the planet that were changing drought factors that caused the people that they had to migrate away and broke down the cultural traditions that they had there. But all of this stuff is absolutely wondrous. I cannot possibly recommend it more highly as places to visit. Yeah. Every one of those sites are magnificent. So, Peter, we're near the end of the hour. Fire off the shameless plug for the book. And I thank you so much for hosting. And StreamYard worked. I was holding my breath. Thank you, Lisa. Love you too.
Bye.
Run shameless plug.
Bye.